Good morning and welcome to the new episode of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. As India celebrates its Republic Day tomorrow, we all consider Indian Constitution to be an ideal constitution drafted by Constituent Assembly. And I find that all the political leaders swear by it, and rightly so. After all, this is the guiding principle. The largest written constitution of the world was drafted and approved by the Constituent Assembly. But was it only the work of the Constituent Assembly? Are we aware of the background realities that the original model which was in the minds of the people who were in the Constituent Assembly, they were modified to ensure that the Constitution suits Indian psyche. The Westminster model is no longer there in the Constitution, though they swear it's the Westminster model. No way. It is, I'll prefer to call it Eastminster model. And this Constitution's formulation reminds me of T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland. Now, you would be considering how is it that T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland, which was published in 1922, resonates in India. And it's not because of its prophecy, it's not because of its style, but because it's a curious tale. It picked up from Brihad Aranika. Brihad Aranika is the base of this long poem, The Wasteland. The Aranika, the earliest among the Upanishads, is a treasure trove of mythical stories, one of which appears in the fifth section of The Wasteland, titled What the Thunder Said. And that's how it goes. After Prajapati, the creator, had made beings, and then he danced in frenzy, shouting da 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 da. Then he assembled his creation, the devas, the angels, the danavas, the demons, and the manavas, the human beings. And he asked them, have they understood what he was saying, da 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 da? The deva, the angels, said, da is damyata, learn self-control. Humans thought it was data, learn to overcome greed. Danav, the devils, the demons, said it was Dyadam, learn to forgive. The Prajapati, the creator, laughed enigmatically and said, well, you seem to have understood. He paused and then perhaps. So he was not sure. Now, without forgetting that this is a myth, not a history, I've often wondered if there was a moment in the Indian history when the Prajapati danced in ecstasy for having created what had to be created. And I like to believe that November 26, 1949 was that moment when we, the people of India, adopted, elected, and gave unto ourselves the Constitution that gave a hope that no past era had provided. But what diverse responses does it evoke now? That was the immediate reaction. But after that, things have changed a lot. And what's the reaction today? Remembering that day, the constitutional head of the Indian Judiciary, CGI, Chief Justice of India, said that the citizenry of independent India had breathed life into what might otherwise have been just a bare document. Many freedom fighters, Gandhi, Ambedkar, Nehru, Lajpat Rai, Patel, Aladi Krishna Swami, he reminded the nation were lawyers. His appreciation of litigants, judges, lawmakers and lawyers revealed that the country, that is the people who mattered above all, not anybody else. Now, in response to this Constitution Divas, the Constitution Day, Samvidhan Divas, where the principal opposition parties was to remind the Prime Minister that the institutions provided in the Constitution are being rendered dysfunctional during his regime, as if they were not dysfunctional earlier. And the Constitution was being undermined every day, as if it had not been undermined, violated, raped day in and day out in the last 70 years. The thoughts of the Prime Minister on that day revolved around his pet theme of dynastic politics as a threat to democracy, colonial mindset, and misuse of freedom enshrined in the Constitution as hindrance to the country's development. The irritation towards the hindering development was clear in the word and the tone. But curiously, all three paid homage to those who gave up their lives to make India free. Influenced by the visuals in the films, theatres, stories heard from the elders, and the distorted freedom struggle is quite truncated. We remember hundreds and thousands of the people who plunged into Quit India and civil disobedience movements, faced the gallows, were hung, they were shot by the colonial police, they rotted in jails. But do we remember the tribals who fought the British rule in forests, in villages and the cities, right from Santhal uprising of 1850s till independence in 1947? The contribution of those people towards enshrining freedom and our rights, which is a living part of the Constitution of India, and that contribution has been forgotten because that is what changed the Westminster model into Eastminster model. I remember that one of the many struggles for India's freedom was by the Battle of Aberdeen. Now, Aberdeen was a violent clash between Advasi population of Andaman Islands and the British and the convicts deported to Andamans after 57. In April 1859, 2 years after 57, a batch of the Indian prisoners had escaped the Pandal settlement and wanted to hide in the habitat of Adivasis. All but one of the convicts were killed, as they had been clearing the forest for creating British settlements. A month later, in May 1859, the Adivasis attacked the British establishment. But one Tiwari, convict number 276, who had not been killed, betrayed them and reported the plot to the British. As a result, 1,500 men were killed by the Navy ship Charlotte, while the convict attempted to escape. And in the previous year, in a single day, on May 1858, scores of the prisoners had been hanged. But do we really know that it was a sacrifice of these tribals, these Advises in Andamans? No history book refers to that. And the betrayal by the so-called freedom fighters like Dudanath Tiwari, convict number 276, to curry favor. Now, 26 of these people deported from Bombay Presidency alone, and most in their teens. And Indian Council of Historical Research has documented that those who were deported to Andaman from Bombay 37 were hanged, and they belonged to all castes and religions. Out of 37, 14 are Muslims. And not just the events of 1857 struggle. The long history of freedom struggle, men and women, from all castes, communities, religions, regions, lived and died to create a free and forward-looking India. And that's what's enshrined in the Constitution. That's the genesis. And we talk of the Constitution without talking of Genesis. It's like talking of the Bible and removing Genesis absolutely. And that's a tragedy. Till we know the roots, we will not cherish the fruit. While some individuals submitted mercy petitions, agreed, some became informers of Tiwari, like Tiwari, the British. Tribal communities did not do so. The tribal communities, workers, peasants, students, they didn't care to apologize. They did not ask for the mercy, but the leaders did. And the Constitution was and remains till today the culmination of that struggle. Returning to the Aryanka myth, one agrees with the CGI that the people have kept the Constitution alive, despite the clean chits to the architects of riots and FIR against victims of atrocities. One also agrees with the opposition that democratic institutions have crumbled. Yes, and even the Prime Minister was right in pointing out the family-centric action as a hindrance to the rights of the people. One wonders if the mythical Prajapati, he would love, for it knows that once the Constitution is no guarantee always the Constitution. And that's what's happening in India. Constitution has been amended, modified out of shape. Now, examining the Constitution as it took the final shape in November 49, I was reading that the Assembly member Kangal Hanumathaya rejected, very sad, he remarked, "We wanted the music of a veena or star. We have the music of an English band." It was a feeling that many shared, and either the Constitution, the institutional system it engenders, lacked the Indianness. It replicated anglicized form that was not suited to the Indian psyche, but that has been firmly ensconced in the mainstream political discourse. Cause to decolonize India's political and constitutional struggle was once made by one justice, Abdul Nasir, but they are there. It is true that indigenous, particularly Gandhian alternatives put forward by men like Radha Kamal Mukherjee, Shriman Narayan Agarwal were rejected out of hand. And that was a tragedy. But still, given the situation, the creation of the Constitution was far more than just transplanting the Westminster model on the Indian soil. The genesis basically continued in transformation of the Westminster model. Desperately poor, uneducated, little knowledge of the experience of parliamentary democracy, absence of enabling background conditions. The India of 1947, its political and judicial institutions, lacked the traditions, lacked the precedents and conventions of Westminster model. So it was needed to address this lacking, and instant conventions were created. Now, conventions take a long time, but they were created. And that gave Indian founding fathers the space to shape the Westminster model to suit Indian psyche. The resulting conceptual and practical distinction from the Westminster model in Australia, New Zealand, Canada were not relevant. So while embracing Westminster style of democracy, Indian constitution bent, twisted and adapted its norms and techniques, creating something very different in substance, both unusual and hard to recognize. And many of these distinctions were basically to suit the ideology of the leaders at that time, like Patel, Ambedkar, and Nehru. But even when engaged in the language and the paradigm of the British constitutional legacy, Indian constitution created a typology of its own, distinct from Westminster. And that's why the constitutional historian called this constitution the first of its kind, in contrast to the uncodified, sparsely codified constitution of UK, Canada, and other countries. Indian constitution, lengthiest in the world, went into very extensive details. This was driven not by crude obsession with verbosity, but need to explicate our rules and provide firm and detailed guidance for the institutions. It was indigenous answer to the Indian circumstances. And the absence of experience, tradition and precedent, which is emblematic of Westminster model. So the founding fathers attempted to use the constitution as a pedagogical tool to train the institutions. And the result, a state was created explicitly committed to revolutionary social aims embedded in the constitution. Individual rights hemmed in with multiple provisions that enable the government to override those rights. Through Article 123, that confers the power to promulgate ordinances, the Constitution clothed the executive with legislative powers. And that's not what the Westminster model is. It allowed the government to legislate for 6 months in place of Parliament without declare. This is a power unheard of anywhere where the Westminster model is adopted. And to stress this dominance further, it prescribed no period for the duration of the parliamentary session, leaving it absolutely to the government to decide when the parliament should be summoned, how long should it sit. Now, House of Commons can be prorogued to a definite date. Then the average length of prorogation in the recent past has been 18 days. Lok Sabha is entirely at the executive mercy. So such executive preeminence was there to only satisfy the whims of Nehru, who wanted to use that period for implementing his agencies, his ideas. These were some of the obvious distinctions. There are many others. And all of them are indigenous mechanisms. Innocuous they may seem, but they engendered an institutional form and political culture that is recognizably Indian, widely different than the Westminster, and is recognizable beyond the outward form. Even a cursory observer will notice that Indian democracy is far from Westminster model, and its constitutional structure far from simply an anglicized transplant. So, shunning Indian type institutions, as Fali Nariman, the famous jurist, says, represents a kind of indigenousness that has served to root the Constitution in the Indian soil. It's more than an imposition or a transplant. It is creation of a hybrid system. And that's why I call this Constitution a living Eastminster level, which suited Indian psyche Indian tradition, and the sacrifices, documented and undocumented, especially the undocumented, because that was the running strand which created this constitution for guiding the destiny of the nation. This genesis is extremely important from the point of view of comprehending the reasonable modifications, adaptations of the Westminster model into the Eastminster model. Thank you.